"Where did you get that tattoo?" the officer said, his voice a low tremor of something she hadn't heard in years. Fear. But the moment passed, a flicker in the harsh fluorescent lights of the command center. The crisis was not over. She had work to do. The question and the man who asked it would have to wait. Her arrival at Forward Operating Base Kestrel had been an exercise in administrative grayness. Master Sergeant Anya Petrova, reassigned. The paperwork said, Logistics and Supply Chain Management, a title as bland and functional as the dun-colored fatigues she wore. The transport dropped her and her single duffel bag on the dusty helipad, the rotors whipping grit into the air, a stinging welcome to the far edge of the world. No one was there to meet her. She found her own way to the command post, a low-slung building of reinforced concrete and sandbags, the nerve center of this lonely outpost. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of stale coffee and ozone. A young specialist, his name tag reading Tanaka, looked up from a screen, his eyes wide with the boredom of a long deployment. "Can I help you, Sergeant?" "Petrova, reporting for duty," she said. Her voice was level, carrying no more inflection than necessary. Tanaka typed, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm. "Petrova, Anya, got it. You're in Supply Building Gamma. Sergeant Okoro is expecting you." He pointed vaguely toward a door. Out back, past the motor pool. Building Gamma was less a building and more a collection of interconnected metal containers baking under the high desert sun. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of canvas and packing grease. Sergeant Bassi Okoro, a man whose frame seemed too large for the cramped space, gave her a cursory glance and a grunt. "Petrova, right? You're on inventory. The manifests are on the desk. Everything in Bay 3 needs to be cataloged and cross-referenced with the inbound shipment logs from 2 weeks ago. Don't touch anything in Bay 4-inch. Anya nodded. She placed her bag under the small metal desk that was now hers and picked up the datapad. The interface was clunky, the system outdated. She spent the first hour not on inventory, but on observing. She watched the flow of soldiers coming and going, the casual way they handled equipment, the predictable routes the perimeter patrols took. She noted the position of the communications array on the ridge overlooking the base, its support struts glinting in the sun. She noticed the slight sag in the southwest corner of the concertina wire fence, just enough for a determined intruder to exploit. Her mind, a machine honed by decades of a different kind of work, cataloged threats and vulnerabilities with the same dispassionate efficiency she was supposed to be applying to crates of rations and spare parts. By the end of her first day, she had reorganized the digital filing system, created a predictive algorithm for spare part consumption based on maintenance schedules she'd quietly accessed, and cataloged half of Bay 3. Okoro found her as she was signing out, staring at the datapad with a confused frown. "You cleared the whole manifest for sections A through F. And G," Anya said, pulling on her jacket. The evening air was already growing cold. "I found discrepancies in the ammunition count. We're short 3 crates of 762 millimeters. Koro blinked. Nobody's counted the ammo stores in months. He looked from the datapad to the quiet woman standing before him. There was nothing remarkable about her. She was of average height, her face lined with the faint etchings of time, her graying hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun. Yet, there was a stillness to her, a profound economy of motion that was unnerving. As she turned to leave, the cuff of her jacket rode up her forearm for a second, revealing a sliver of black ink, a geometric shape. He dismissed it, just another lifer with a story. He had no idea what kind of story it was. Colonel Marcus Thorne prided himself on running a tight ship, even if that ship was grounded in the middle of a desolate wasteland. He believed in order, in regulations, in the clear and visible chain of command. His morning tour of the base was a ritual, a way to project authority and catch deficiencies before they became liabilities. He found his new master sergeant in the supply depot, standing as still as a statue, her eyes fixed on a schematic of the base's water filtration system she had pulled up on her datapad. "Sergeant." Thorne's voice cut through the quiet hum of the depot. Anya turned, her expression unreadable. "Colonel." Sergeant Okoro tells me you've made quite an impression, Thorne said, though his tone suggested it wasn't a compliment. He walked closer, his boots loud on the concrete floor. He says you've reorganized his entire inventory system in less than a week. A task that was slated to take his team a month. The previous system was inefficient, sir, Anya stated simply. Was it? Thorne stopped in front of her, his gaze sweeping over her with the critical eye of a man inspecting a faulty piece of equipment. Your file is sparse, Petrova. 25 years of service, most of it redacted. A long stint in signals intelligence, then a sideways move to logistics. Now you're here. It looks like the kind of career path someone takes when they're being put out to pasture. Sent to retire in place, the words were a deliberate prod, a test of her composure. Anya's posture didn't change. Her gaze didn't waver. I go where the command sends me, sir. See that you do, Thorne said, his voice clipped. He gestured at the datapad. Stick to counting boxes. Leave the base schematics to the engineers. As he spoke, she reached out to set the datapad on a nearby crate. The motion was fluid, economical. Again, her sleeve slid back an inch. This time, Thorne saw the tattoo clearly. It wasn't the usual fare. No skulls, no flags, no unit insignias he recognized. It was a stark, black design on the pale skin of her inner forearm. A stylized raven, its wings sharp angles, holding a single broken chain link in its beak. Thorne's lip curled in a small, dismissive sneer. Quaint, he murmured, more to himself than to her. A piece of tribal art, perhaps. A youthful indiscretion. It meant nothing. It was just another detail that didn't fit the neat box he wanted to put her in. He turned on his heel, dismissing her from his mind as easily as he dismissed the tattoo. Carry on, Sergeant. Anya watched him go, her expression unchanged. She had felt his condescension like a change in barometric pressure. It was a familiar feeling. Men like Thorne saw the world in straight lines and clear hierarchies. They saw a middle-aged woman in a dead-end posting and drew their conclusions. They couldn't see the architecture of a ghost in the machine, the silent predator that had lived behind her eyes for 3 decades. She pulled her cuff down, the fabric covering the symbol of a life he couldn't possibly comprehend. She preferred it that way. Anonymity was armor. She went back to her work, her mind already moving past the colonel's petty dominance display and back to the hum of the bass, listening for the notes that were out of key. She did not stick to counting boxes. In the quiet hours of her off-duty time, when most soldiers were in the rec hall or on video calls home, Anya Petrova was mapping the soul of FOB Kestrel. From her small desk in the supply depot, she used the base's network, with its surprisingly lax internal security, as her library. Her interest was not in secrets or gossip, but in systems. She traced the pathways of power cables, the flow of data, the schedules of satellite uplinks. Her mind, trained to see patterns in chaos, absorbed it all. She spent an evening studying the personnel files of the communications team. Lieutenant Davies, the officer in charge, was sharp but inexperienced, his expertise purely academic. His NCOs were competent but trained for maintenance, not crisis. They knew how to replace a server blade, but they wouldn't know how to defend it from a truly hostile intrusion. She noted their training records, the specific cybersecurity modules they had completed, and the ones they had not. Her observation was not limited to the digital realm. During her mandatory morning physical training, she did not join the grunting pack of younger soldiers on the parade ground. Instead, she ran the perimeter, alone. Her pace was steady, a slow, enduring rhythm that ate up the miles. But she wasn't just running. She was studying the terrain. She noted the wadis and dry riverbeds that offered covered approaches to the base. She measured the fields of fire from the guard towers, identifying the blind spots the architects had missed and the concertina wire had failed to cover. She saw how the guards in Tower 4 always had their backs to the western approach for a few minutes around sunrise, distracted by the spectacle. One afternoon, Specialist Tanaka found her standing near the motor pool, seemingly staring into space. He had grown fascinated by the quiet master sergeant. She was a puzzle. She did her job with a terrifying competence that made everyone else look lazy, yet she never spoke of it. She was a ghost who left ripples of perfect order in her wake. "Everything all right, Sergeant?" he asked, hesitant to break her concentration. Anya's gaze shifted to him. It wasn't a sudden movement. It was a slow, deliberate refocusing, as if she were a lens adjusting its depth of field. "The new transport vehicles," she said, her voice low. "The LAT Versus. Their network interface is a standard civilian model with a military-grade encryption wrapper." Tanaka frowned. "Yeah, it's supposed to be state-of-the-art." "The wrapper is secure," Anya continued, her eyes turning back to the vehicle. "But the underlying OS has a known vulnerability. A kernel exploit that was patched in the civilian sector 18 months ago. The military procurement process is slower." She looked at Tanaka. "If someone could bypass the wrapper, they could access the vehicle's entire CAN bus system. Steering, acceleration, brakes, everything." Tanaka felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert wind. He was a mechanic. He knew the vehicle systems inside and out, but he thought in terms of wrenches and diagnostics ports. He never thought of the code underneath as a weapon. How do you know that?" Anya just gave a slight shrug, a gesture that was both an answer and a dismissal. She turned and walked back toward the supply depot, leaving Tanaka standing by the silent, seemingly inert vehicle, which now looked to him like a time bomb. He was beginning to understand that Master Sergeant Petrova didn't just see the world. She saw its hidden wiring, its points of failure. And for the first time, he wondered not what she was doing here, but what she was running from. Or perhaps what she was waiting for. The pressure began as a flicker. On the main tactical display in the command center, a single data point for a remote sensor blinked out, then came back online. Lieutenant Davies, the young comms officer, noted it in his log as a transient malfunction. 10 minutes later, 2 more sensors blinked out. Then a whole sector went dark. "What's going on, Davies?" Colonel Thorne's voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of the operations room. "Unsure, sir," Davies replied, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Multiple sensor failures in the northern perimeter. It could be a dust storm interfering with the microwave relays." Anya, who had been dispatched to the command center to deliver a requested hard drive, stood silently near the doorway. She tilted her head, listening not to the words but to the sounds of the room. The frantic, rising pitch of Davies's voice. The staccato tapping of his keyboard, faster now, more desperate. The low, anxious murmur that was beginning to spread among the other operators. She looked at the main screen. It wasn't a dust storm. The failures weren't random. They were sequential, a spreading stain of darkness moving along a predictable path. It was deliberate. Then the lights in the command center flickered and died, plunging the room into emergency red lighting. A collective gasp went through the room. The main screen went black, then lit up with a cascade of nonsensical characters, a waterfall of green gibberish. "Network intrusion," Davies yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "We've lost the main server. I'm locked out." Thorne slammed his hand on the console. "Get it back. Now." "I can't. They're in. They're everywhere." Alarms began to blare across the base, a discordant symphony of chaos. The automated defense systems, now compromised, started to twitch. A phalanx turret on the roof whirred and swiveled, aiming at one of its own guard towers before its power was cut. In the motor pool, the headlights of an LATV flashed on and off, its engine revving without a driver. Tanaka's blood ran cold as he remembered Anya's warning. Panic was a contagion. The operators in the command center were shouting, some trying to reboot their terminals, others staring in frozen horror at the corrupted screens. Colonel Thorne, his face a mask of fury and helplessness, was barking orders that no one could follow. "Cut the connection to the satellite. Isolate the network. Someone get me a hard line to brigade command." But all the lines were dead. They were an island and the water was rising. Through it all, Anya Petrova remained perfectly still. She had seen this before. Not this exact code, not the specific attack, but she knew the anatomy of a system collapse. She recognized the cold, calculated precision of the assault. This wasn't a simple hack. This was a decapitation strike, designed to blind and deafen them before the real attack began. Her calm was a vacuum in the swirling storm of the room. Her heart rate was steady, her breathing slow and deep. She wasn't panicking. She was analyzing. She was waiting for her moment. The time for observation was over. The time for intervention had arrived. While Thorne bellowed and Davies fumbled, Anya moved. Her steps were silent, her path weaving through the panicked bodies with an unnatural grace. No one noticed her. All eyes were on the dying main console, the symbol of their lost control. She ignored it. It was a decoy, a noisy distraction designed to draw their attention. The real battle was deeper in the system. She stopped at a secondary terminal in the corner of the room, a logistics node used for tracking supply convoys. It was considered non-critical, and the attacker had likely ignored it. Specialist Tanaka, having run to the command center from the motor pool, saw her. He watched as she sat down, her back straight, her posture radiating an impossible calm. She didn't try the standard login. Her fingers moved over the keyboard, a blur of motion. She wasn't typing commands. She was writing code. Raw, direct, a language the machine understood at its most fundamental level. She was bypassing the compromised operating system entirely, speaking directly to the server's core architecture. The screen, which had been displaying a simple login prompt, flickered and filled with lines of text that Tanaka didn't recognize. It was elegant, brutal, and terrifyingly fast. Lieutenant Davies, giving up on his own terminal, saw what she was doing. "What is that?" "Sergeant, that's a non-secure terminal. You'll compromise the entire—" "The network is already compromised, Lieutenant," Anya said without looking up, her voice a flat, cold line. "They are using a recursive algorithm to burrow into the core command functions. Your firewalls are irrelevant." She typed a final command string and hit enter. On the main screen, the waterfall of green gibberish froze. A single, black box appeared in the center of the corrupted data. Inside the box, a new process began. Anya was not trying to fight the virus on its own terms. That would take too long. Instead, she was building a cage. She was creating a virtualized partition, a digital prison, and tricking the hostile code into migrating into it, drawn by what looked like unprotected high-value data. A honeypot. Colonel Thorne strode over, his face flushed with anger. "Master Sergeant Petrova, I did not give you an order. Step away from that terminal now." Anya ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, watching the progress bar on her hastily constructed prison fill up. 70%, 80%. The hostile code was taking the bait. It was a battle of wits and speed, fought in milliseconds. 95%. She could feel the attacker on the other end now, sensing the trap. They were trying to pull their code back. But it was too late. With a final, sharp tap of the enter key, she slammed the door. The black box on the main screen flashed once, then solidified. The cascade of green text vanished, replaced by the standard, stable interface of the base's operating system. The alarms cut out, plunging the room into a sudden, ringing silence. The emergency red lights gave way to the steady, white glow of the main fixtures. Anya leaned back in her chair, a single, slow exhale. She had isolated the intruder. She hadn't eliminated them, but she had contained them. They were trapped in a digital box, cut off from the rest of the network. A stunned silence filled the command center. Everyone stared at the main screen, then at the quiet master sergeant sitting at the forgotten logistics terminal. Lieutenant Davies walked over, his face pale with disbelief. He looked at her screen, at the lines of code she had written. It was a dialect of machine language he had only read about in textbooks, theoretical and archaic. How did you do that?" he whispered, his voice full of awe. Anya simply looked at him. She offered no explanation. She didn't boast. She didn't smile. She just stood up, her duty done. "The hostile entity is contained, but not neutralized," she said, her voice returning to its normal, level tone. "They are still in the system, And they will know we have trapped them. She had bought them time. She knew, with chilling certainty, what would come next. The shift in the room was palpable. It was as if the air itself had changed its molecular structure. The panic had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, disbelieving silence. The eyes of every soldier in the command center were now fixed on Anya Petrova. The woman they had seen as a paper pusher, a relic, had just single-handedly wrestled their entire digital infrastructure back from the brink of annihilation. Colonel Thorne stared, his mouth slightly agape. The fury had drained from his face, leaving behind a pallid mask of confusion. The neat lines of his world had just been violently erased. Regulations, chain of command, proper procedure, all had failed. And this supply sergeant had succeeded with nothing but a low-priority terminal and a few dozen lines of archaic code. His anger at her insubordination warred with the undeniable fact that she had just saved them. For a long moment he said nothing. He simply couldn't process it. Specialist Tanaka, standing by the doorway, felt a surge of vindication. He hadn't been wrong about her. The puzzle was beginning to form a picture, and it was far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined. He looked at the other junior soldiers, the operators and specialists. Their expressions mirrored his own. Awe, tinged with a healthy dose of fear. Who was she? The whispers started then, quiet as rustling leaves but spreading just as fast. Did you see that? Where did she learn to code like that? She didn't even ask. The myth of the quiet logistics sergeant was dissolving in real time, replaced by a legend forged in the last 5 minutes. Lieutenant Davies was the first to fully grasp the technical miracle he had witnessed. He moved to the main console, his hands moving with a new, hesitant reverence. He ran a diagnostic. "She's right," he announced to the room, his voice still shaky. "The malicious code is completely isolated in a sandboxed partition. Can't access anything. The core systems are secure." He looked back at Anya. "Sergeant, the algorithm you used to build the partition, that's not in any manual. It's not standard protocol." "It was necessary," Anya said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She began to walk toward the door, her part in this seemingly over. "Wait!" Thorne's voice was hoarse. He finally found his words, though they were uncertain. "Where are you going?" "Back to the depot, sir," she replied. "Sergeant Okoro is expecting a manifest report." The sheer, staggering absurdity of the statement hung in the air. The woman who had just fought and won a war in cyberspace was going back to count spare parts. Thorne felt a dizzying sense of cognitive dissonance. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the utter lack of pride in her eyes, the absence of any need for acknowledgement. She had acted not for glory, but out of necessity, like a master craftsman picking up a tool to fix a complex machine. The action was its own reward. "Stay here, Sergeant," Thorne commanded, his tone different now. The condescension was gone, replaced by a grudging, bewildered respect. He didn't know who she was or where she came from, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was an amateur in a professional's world, and the professional was standing right in front of him. The problem wasn't over. Anya had said the attacker was trapped, not gone. Thorne had a sinking feeling that this was only the first act. The quiet in the command center was short-lived. A new alarm, this one a proximity alert from the few remaining analog sensors on the perimeter fence, began to beep with a steady, ominous rhythm. On the restored tactical map, red icons began to appear. Dozens of them. They were appearing in the west, moving through the very wadis and dry riverbeds Anya had noted on her runs, exploiting the blind spot from Tower 4. "They're here," Tanaka breathed. The cyber attack had been the overture. This was the symphony. The enemy had used the communications blackout to move their ground forces into position, unseen and unopposed. They knew the base was blind and deaf. They were moving to strike. "Get me a sit rep," Thorne barked, his command authority returning with the familiar threat of physical combat. "All units, battle stations. I want those automated defenses online." Davies's face went pale again. "Sir, I can't." The control system for the defense grid was in the partition she created. The virus is still wrapped around it. I can reboot the system, but it would take at least 20 minutes to purge the code and reinitialize. They'll be on top of us by then. The red icons on the map were closer now, swarming toward the weak point in the fence line. They would be through in minutes. The soldiers in the guard towers were firing, but they were outnumbered and their positions were being systematically targeted with RPGs. Thorne was out of options. His men were outmatched. His technology was a prisoner in its own system. The straight, predictable lines of his world had led him to a dead end. In the strained silence, filled only by the rhythmic beeping of the proximity alarm and the distant crackle of gunfire, he turned. His eyes found Anya Petrova. She was standing by the tactical map, her gaze fixed on the approaching red icons. Her face was a study in calm concentration. She wasn't watching the screen like the others with fear or panic. She was reading it the way a grandmaster reads a chessboard, seeing not just the current moves, but the possibilities 10 moves ahead. Thorne walked over to her. The entire command staff watched, holding their breath. The colonel, the absolute authority of FOB Kestrel, was about to defer. It was a moment that broke every rule in his book. "Sergeant," he said, his voice low and devoid of all its previous arrogance. It was the voice of a man asking for help. "Davies says the defense grid is offline. He can't get it back without letting the virus out of its cage. Is there another way?" He paused, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Can you fix this?" It was the ultimate test. It was one thing to be a phantom in the machine, a brilliant coder. It was another to bring a complex, kinetic weapon system back to life under fire. This was not about code anymore. This was about hardware, power conduits, and the physical interface between the digital and the real world. Anya didn't answer immediately. Her gaze moved from the tactical map to the base schematics she had been studying earlier that week. She traced a line with her finger, a power conduit that ran from the backup generators directly to the defense grid's primary control hub, bypassing the main server room completely. "There is a manual override," she said, "at the primary power junction. It's a hardwired failsafe. It's not on the standard schematics." Davies shook his head. "That's impossible. There's no such thing." "It's there," Anya stated, her certainty absolute, "but it requires a physical key sequence on the circuit breakers to activate. And the main conduit has likely been damaged in the initial attack." She looked at Thorne, her eyes clear and direct. "I can bring the grid online, but I have to go to the junction box." The junction box was located on the outer wall of the command building, exposed to the western approach. Exposed to the enemy. It was a suicide mission. Thorne hesitated for only a second. He looked at the map, at the red icons now just hundreds of meters from the fence. He looked at the faces of his men. He looked back at Anya. "Do it," he said. Anya gave a single, sharp nod. Without another word, she turned and strode toward the exit. As she moved, she began to unbutton the cuffs of her uniform jacket, rolling them up her forearms with methodical precision, preparing for work. The movement fully exposed the tattoo of the black raven and the broken chain. It was then that another officer, who had been in the command center since just before the attack, finally saw it. Major Eva Rostova, a special operations liaison who had arrived by helicopter only an hour prior for a classified briefing with Thorne, had been a silent observer until now. Her eyes, trained to notice details others missed, locked onto the symbol on Anya's forearm. Her professional calm shattered. She took an involuntary step back, her face draining of all color. The command center, the incoming attack, Colonel Thorne, it all faded away. The only thing in the world was that tattoo. A ghost from a story she had only heard whispered in the most secretive circles. A story told to frighten new recruits in the deep black world she inhabited. She pointed, her finger trembling slightly. "Where did you get that tattoo?" she asked, her voice a choked whisper, frozen in a mixture of awe and pure, undiluted fear. Thorne turned, confused by the Major's sudden, dramatic reaction. To him, it was just a strange marking. "Major, what is it?" We don't have time for. But Rostova wasn't listening to him. Her eyes were locked on Anya, who had paused at the door, her hand on the latch. Rostova's voice grew stronger, laced with a dawning, terrible understanding. That symbol, the raven, the broken chain. She took a step closer, her gaze intense, searching Anya's face for a sign. Any sign. They said the program was terminated. They said everyone involved was gone. Wiped from the records. The name fell from her lips like a stone into a deep well, the sound swallowed by the sudden, tense silence of the room. Corvus, she breathed. The name meant nothing to Thorne or the other soldiers in the room. It was just a word, but it hit the command center with the force of a physical blow. Project Corvus. It wasn't a unit. It was a myth, a boogeyman, a ghost program that officially never existed. They were the cleaners, the digital ghosts who handled the nation's darkest and most impossible problems. They didn't just hack systems. They dismantled them, rewrote them, and bent them to their will. They were spoken of as phantoms who could topple a government with a keyboard, who could erase a person from existence, who could break any code, any system, any man. And they were all supposed to be dead casualties of a final, classified mission that went so wrong the entire project was buried under layers of impenetrable secrecy. Anya met Rostova's terrified gaze. For the first time, a flicker of something ancient and weary passed through her own eyes. Acknowledgement. She didn't speak the name. She didn't have to. The raven on her arm spoke for her. She turned her back on the stunned major and the utterly bewildered colonel. She pushed the door open and stepped out into the night, into the cacophony of incoming fire. The legend of Corvus was irrelevant. The name didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the broken machine and the approaching enemy. She had a job to do. Thorne stood paralyzed for a moment, the word Corvus echoing in his mind. He looked from Rostova's ashen face back to the empty doorway where Anya had just been. The quiet logistics sergeant. The woman he'd dismissed as a has-been. It was like discovering the mild-mannered janitor was, in fact, the architect of the entire building and knew all its secrets. The condescension he'd felt earlier curdled into a profound, chilling sense of humility. He had been a child playing with toys in the presence of a master. Outside, the battle raged. Anya moved through the chaos with the same preternatural calm she'd displayed in the command center. Bullets whizzed past, impacting the concrete walls around her with sharp cracks. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. Her movements were economical, hugging the shadows, her internal map of the base guiding her steps. The path to the junction box was 50 meters of open ground. She reached it, a simple metal panel on the wall, and wrenched it open. Inside was a tangle of thick cables and circuit breakers. As she had predicted, the main conduit was scorched, a piece of shrapnel having torn through it. Sparks flew from the damaged wiring. Working by the flickering emergency lights and the strobing glare of muzzle flashes, she pulled a multi-tool from her pocket. Her hands were steady, her fingers moving with the precision of a surgeon. She stripped the insulation from the bypass cables, her movements sure and practiced. This was just another machine, a simpler one than the code she had fought earlier. Back in the command center, they watched on a single, grainy security camera feed. A small group of enemy fighters broke through the fence and saw her, a lone figure silhouetted against the sparks of the junction box. They raised their rifles. "Get her some cover fire," Thorne roared into his headset. But before the tower guards could react, Anya acted. Without looking up from her work, her left hand shot out and grabbed a loose piece of metal conduit from the ground. With a flick of her wrist, she threw it. It spun through the air and slammed into a junction controlling the area's floodlights. The lights exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the area into darkness. The enemy fighters, momentarily blinded, fired wildly into the blackness. In that brief moment of confusion, Anya made the final connection. She slammed 3 breakers down in a specific rhythmic sequence. 1, 2, 3. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the ground as immense power was rerouted. All across the base, the automated defense turrets, which had been limp and lifeless, word to life. Their targeting systems, now running on a clean, isolated power source, acquired targets with ruthless efficiency. Streams of tracer fire erupted from the turrets, cutting through the darkness, scything through the ranks of the advancing enemy. The tide of the battle turned in less than 5 seconds. The coordinated assault dissolved into a panicked retreat. The base was saved. Anya stood up, wiping a smear of grease from her cheek with the back of her hand. She looked at the turrets, confirming they were functioning correctly. Then, she turned and walked calmly back toward the command center, the sounds of the retreating enemy fading behind her. The door to the command center opened, and Anya stepped inside. The room was silent. Every eye was on her. The sounds of the automated turrets methodically eliminating the last of the attackers outside was the only noise. She had a new smudge of soot on her face, and her sleeve was torn, but she was unharmed. She walked past Major Rostova, who looked at her as if she were a deity or a demon, and stopped in front of Colonel Thorne's console. "The defense grid is online, sir," she reported. Her voice as flat and formal as if she were reporting on a supply shipment. "It is running on a hardwired bypass. I would recommend a full diagnostic and system purge before attempting to reintegrate it with the main network." Thorne stared at her. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he say? "Thank you" felt laughably inadequate. "I'm sorry" felt pathetic. He was a colonel, a commander. He was supposed to be in charge. But in the last hour, he had been a spectator to a level of competence so far beyond his own that it defied his entire understanding of the military. He had dismissed her, ridiculed her, and she had saved his command, his base, and the lives of every soldier under him twice. He looked at the tattoo on her arm, the black raven that was now a brand of legend in his eyes. He thought of the name Rostova had whispered, Corvus, a ghost. Slowly, Thorne pushed his chair back and stood up. He drew himself to his full height, his posture ramrod straight. He looked at Master Sergeant Anya Petrova, the logistics clerk, the woman he had sent to retire in place. In the dead silent room, filled with the best and brightest of his command, he raised his hand to his brow. It wasn't a quick, perfunctory gesture. It was a slow, deliberate, formal salute, the deepest sign of respect one soldier can give another. It was an apology, a thank you, and an acknowledgement of her true rank, a rank that had nothing to do with the stripes on her sleeve. For a moment, Anya just looked at him. Then, she returned the gesture, her own salute just as crisp, just as formal. An acknowledgement of his apology. Around the room, one by one, the other soldiers began to stand. Lieutenant Davies, his face a mixture of awe and shame for his own panic. Specialist Tanaka, his eyes shining with pure admiration. Even Major Rostova, the special operator, stood and raised her hand. Soon, every person in the command center was standing at attention, saluting the quiet master sergeant who had been hiding in plain sight. Anya held the salute for a beat longer, her gaze sweeping the room. She saw the respect in their eyes, earned, not demanded. Then she dropped her hand and, without another word, turned and walked out of the command center, leaving a legend in her wake. In the days that followed, a quiet but profound change settled over FOB Kestrel. The official report, heavily redacted by Major Rostova before it was sent up the chain, was a masterpiece of understatement. It mentioned a sophisticated cyber attack that was repelled due to unconventional but effective countermeasures implemented by base personnel. It mentioned a coordinated ground assault that was defeated by the timely restoration of automated defenses. It never mentioned Project Corvus. It barely mentioned Master Sergeant Anya Petrova. But on the base, everyone knew. The story, passed in hushed tones in the mess hall and the barracks, was already myth. They spoke of how the quiet supply sergeant had tamed the ghost in the machine and called down fire from the sky. The way soldiers looked at her changed. The casual indifference was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding reverence. When she walked across the dusty compound, conversations would quiet. Soldiers would straighten up, their posture unconsciously more formal. They would nod to her, a gesture of profound respect. Sergeant. Colonel Thorne had, as she had recommended, kept the defense grid on its own system. He brought in a specialized team from brigade to purge the network, a process that took them 4 days. The lead technician, a cocky warrant officer, confided in Thorne that the viral code they'd found trapped in the partition was unlike anything he had ever seen. "It's beautiful and terrifying, sir," he'd said. "Whoever wrote the cage that caught it is a ghost." A genius. Thorne had just nodded, saying nothing. He had put in a formal request for Anya's immediate reassignment to a high-level strategic command, citing skills and expertise far exceeding her current role. He knew, however, that it was a pointless gesture. People like Anya Petrova weren't reassigned. They moved when and where they chose. The system didn't control them. Her being at FOB Kestrel had not been a bureaucratic error. He was beginning to suspect it had been a choice. Place to be quiet. Place to be still. A place to be forgotten until she was needed. On the 5th day, Anya was back in her office in the supply depot. The manifests were on her desk. The hum of the lights was the same. Sergeant Okoro now treated her with a terrified politeness, fetching her coffee and triple-checking his own work before showing it to her. She was cataloging a new shipment of medical supplies, her focus as absolute as it had been on the lines of hostile code. Specialist Tanaka stopped by the open door. He didn't enter. He just stood there for a moment, watching her. Finally, he cleared his throat. Anya looked up. "Specialist." "Sergeant," he said. He held up a small, freshly baked pastry on a napkin. "The cook's made a fresh batch. I thought you might like 1 inch." Anya looked at the simple offering, then at the young soldier's earnest, respectful face. For the first time since she had arrived, the corner of her mouth tilted upward in the barest hint of a smile. It was a fleeting expression, there and gone in a second, but it transformed her face, softening the hard lines of discipline and weariness. "Thank you, Tanaka," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. She accepted the pastry. He nodded, flustered and pleased, and quickly walked away. Anya sat at her desk, the pastry untouched beside her datapad. She took a sip of her coffee, her gaze drifting to the window. She looked out over the desolate, sun-bleached landscape she had saved. The wind kicked up dust devils in the distance. The communications tower stood stark against the blue sky. It was a harsh, unforgiving place. But it was quiet now. It was safe. She pushed back her sleeve, the fabric resting just above her wrist. The edge of the black raven tattoo was visible, a silent testament to a life lived in the shadows. She was a weapon, a ghost, a legend. But here, in the quiet of a dusty supply depot, she was simply Anya. Her dignity was her own, her value proven. The respect she had earned was a silent, invisible shield, more powerful than any armor. And for now that was enough.